Good morning, students. I hope all of you are well and sound, and I think it's going to be my first video right after your exams. And I hope all of you have done well, performed well in your exams. Let's see. I will let you know, of course, after checking your exams. So last time, in our last video, we read about the war with Mexico and how the United States expanded across the continent, right? And today we are going to begin a new lesson, that is chapter 14, a new spirit of change, and it's on 448 page in your book. So basically in this lesson you will read about you will learn about religious and reform movements during that time. Okay, so before we begin, first we will revise few important terms that will come during studying this lesson. Number one is the second, here you can see Second Great Awakening. So what was that? What does it mean? It is a Protestant spiritual movement. So here we come to know it's a name of a movement, and that spread through America. Then another term is revival. What is revival? It's a religious gathering. So it's the name of a religious gathering that relied on emotional sermons to encourage religious feelings. Then we have a famous name here is the Charles Grandson Finney. So he was an important preacher in the revivalist movement. And then we have Rolf Waldo Emerson. Rolf Waldo Emerson, he was also a leading transcendental philosopher and well-known writer. And now here a new thing come, like here you can see transcendentalism. So what is transcendentalism? It's a philosophy that emphasizes the truth to be found in nature and intuition. This philosophy, it emphasizes, you can understand it, that they believe that the truth to be found in nature and intuition. And then we have another name is Henry David Thoreau, and he was the author of Walden, who practiced ideas of transcendentalism, right? Then we have civil disobedience. What does it mean? It's a form of protest that calls on people to disobey unjust laws. Utopian communities. It's experimental communities designed to be perfect societies. So these communities, the purpose of these communities was to design everything perfect. Utopian is like it's about something supernatural, something very extraordinary, right? So utopian communities, it's experimental communities. They were designed to be perfect societies. Utopian communities. Then we have Dorothy Dex. It's a name. It's a reformer who worked for improved treatment of the mentally ill. So she was a reformer. So here we are going to begin the lesson, and let me scroll it down. Okay. So the first thing we will come to know about that what was the second great awakening. Like we just read, it was a movement. So what was the second great awakening movement? The second great awakening was a religious movement that swept across the United States after 1800. So after 1800s, this movement was swept across, and this movement stressed individualism and responsibility. So two things you should remember what it stressed upon. Number one, individualism, and then responsibilities. It relied on emotional sermons in meetings called revivals, and a revival might last several days, and its participants were known as revivalists. So those who participated in these meetings, those people, they were called revivalists. During the day, revival participants studied the Bible, and in the evening they heard emotional preaching that could make them cry or tremble with fear. So preachers such as, now we are going to talk about someone famous preacher, that was Charles Grandson Finney. He gave exciting sermons to bring out emotional responses from their audience. This was his, he was very much famous for his exciting sermons. So they preached that each person had the responsibility to find salvation, and they also stressed that people could change themselves and society. This was they believed in. And Charles Finney and other preachers urged people in the United States to attend church, and the revivalist movement, with its message of salvation, attracted numerous African Americans. So there was another thing that happened because of this movement, that the numerous African Americans, they also got attracted toward this towards the message of salvation. And the movement message gave enslaved African Americans hope for freedom. So this, why they were attracted, because they were getting hope for freedom from this movement. So Richard Allen, he started the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So Richard, he started a church and encouraged members to strengthen their faith and fight slavery. So he was this leader. He encouraged them to fight for slavery, and he also strengthened their faith. And the church, finally, at the end, the church, it became a political, cultural, and social center of African Americans. So this church changed into a political or cultural center. So now, first question is, what was the appeal of revivalism? What was the appeal of revivalism? So you can say emotions, exciting sermons, and message of hope. This was the main appeal. Next, we are going to learn about that what was transcendentalism. Okay, so what was transcendentalism? Many people sought an alternative to traditional religion. So they were looking for an alternative. So one philosophical and literary movement was based on the ideas of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And who was he? He was a New England writer and philosopher. And Emerson, he led a group practicing transcendentalism. So the ideas of Ralph Waldo, who was a writer and philosopher, he led a group. So he led a group they were practicing on this philosophy, that is transcendentalism. According to their belief, people could find truth about looking at nature and within themselves rather than in any organized system of belief. This was their belief, that you can, just by looking nature and just by looking within yourself, things can be organized. So they believe in this kind of philosophy. Like, they don't believe in organized system of beliefs, whatever that was those time. But like, they believe that you just by reflecting on nature or within themselves, right? So people could find truth through this way. So it emphasized personal emotions and imagining and living in simple life. Transcendentalists, they believe in the dignity of the individuals, and they fought for social changes such as ending slavery and improving conditions in prisons. So they also wanted to improve the conditions in prisons, and they also want to end up the slavery. They also contributed to a literary movement that stressed freedom and self-reliance. Emerson's friends and follow writers, Henry David, he practiced self-reliance, and he left his regular life and built a cabin. So he left his regular life, and what he did, he built a cabin on the shore of Walden Pond, and where it was near Concord, Massachusetts. Okay, Massachusetts, it's a name. Okay, here you see Massachusetts, and he lived alone there for 2 years. Can you imagine? All alone for 2 years. And David, he believed in civil disobedience. So this was his belief. Like, it means that he believed that people could protest and not obey laws, and they could protest. This is what he believed, and people could disobey those laws which they considered unjust. And so the Unitarian movement was another spirit. Now we are going to learn about another movement, and this movement, like Unitarian movement, was another spiritual movement that grew during this time. And Unitarianism appealed to reason, not to emotion, and they believed that people became better over in immediate change. And the movement attracted wealthy and educated people, and Unitarian ministers like revivalists stressed the power of the individuals. So here again, why did transcendentalism, so what did transcendentalism emphasize? So here we have learned that it emphasized the dignity of the individuals, and people could find truth by looking at nature and within themselves. Now the last thing we will learn from this lesson is that what did Americans attempt to reform? Okay, so self-reformers wanted to create ideal living environments or utopian communities. So here, just as with that, what did Americans attempt to reform? What they were trying to do? They wanted to create a utopian communities, And in these experimental communities, people try to create a perfect place by living in harmony and self sufficiency out in the country. And several utopian communities were established. So, just to make a perfect world, there were several communities that they were established, but none of them succeeded. Of course, it was something extraordinary, it was something supernatural, so they can't be succeeded in this belief. So many Americans, they worked to reform society during the early 80s, because some people believed that the conditions in prisoners were too harsh, so they sought change. Here again we read about the Dorothea Dix. She worked for reform in the treatment of mentally ill people, and she was successful in getting some states to pass laws aimed at improving conditions. She also persuaded some southern states to set up public hospitals for the mentally ill. And in the 1830s, Americans began to demand tax. Okay, so in the 1830s, Americans began to demand tax-supported public schools, and by 1850s, every state had a law that created an elementary school system. So this is how you read about a new spirit of change. So in what areas, now we have a question, that in what areas did Americans push for reform? So here Americans work for improved conditions of prisoners. Number 2, treatment for mentally ill. And number 3, the establishment of tax-supported public education. So here we end up this lesson, and what you are going to do, you are going to read this whole lesson again in detail from your book, chapter 14, A New Spirit, and I will upload this study guide as well. And meantime, take good care of yourself, and I will catch you again with a new lesson. Take care. Bye bye.